With us, though, we begin this morning with President Biden in Edinburgh, Scotland, for the next leg of his latest international tour.
He's in the United Kingdom for the COP26 climate conference today. The president will deliver a statement as the summit kicks off this morning. He'll also attend several meetings with a range of world leaders, from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to the president of Indonesia. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from Edinburgh. He covers the Biden administration's climate policy. So, Josh, the president is in Scotland now. First up, what's on his agenda today?
Hey, Joe. Yeah, we actually just watched in the skies right behind me as Air Force One descended on Scotland. I was kind of surprised you could see it all the way from here. But now President Biden in Scotland, where he hopes to hit the ground running today with a busy day of meetings with the head of the UK, the British Prime Minister, as well as the Secretary General. And then Biden will give his major remarks to the COP26 summit, where he is really aiming to show that the U.S. is back in the game on climate change in a serious way after former President Trump yanked the U.S. out of the Paris climate deal. Biden facing some skepticism given that he has yet to deliver on that major sweeping climate legislation that is part of that spending package still being debated in Congress. But Biden hoping that this will be the opportunity for world leaders to come together, keep alive that hope of limiting climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Josh, let's talk about a major domestic issue. Yesterday, President Biden announced several moves that could try and help ease supply chain issues, which are plaguing the U.S. right now. Could you tell us more about what he said?
Yeah, we heard from Biden about this last night, and his message was, look, normally Americans wouldn't even have to be thinking about things like supply chains, but given the COVID-19 crisis, this is something that is disrupting parts of our daily life, and he says government has a role in trying to address that. And so President Biden announcing that there will be new federal funding to try to really speed up some of the issues they're having at the ports, try to cut red tape, in particular in partnership with our Asian allies. And then Biden also saying that the government will be able to improve the way it uses the national defense stockpiles to make sure that critical minerals and other supplies are available when we face these kinds of shortfalls.
Josh, one more thing we want to ask you about. Last week, it was announced at the last minute that White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki would not be going with the president to Europe. Now we've learned why. It turns out she had family that had tested positive for coronavirus. Now she has tested positive. Right. Couple questions here. How's she doing, and how much contact did she have with the president and other White House staff?
Well, Jen Psaki says she's feeling okay. She has only mild symptoms, and that she last saw the president on Wednesday, where they were more than 6 feet apart, outdoors, wearing masks. Since then, she tested negative 4 days in a row before she then tested positive. And so not a ton of concern about the president. And in fact, we just heard from a White House spokeswoman aboard Air Force One that President Biden took a COVID test yesterday in preparation for entering the United Kingdom today. President Biden also tested negative, Joe.
All right. Busy morning. Josh Letterman, thanks so much.
Now, President Biden is just one of the more than 100 world leaders attending COP26, the UN climate change conference in Glasgow. The summit is being billed as the world's last best chance to curb the climate crisis. As scientists warn, time is running out. In August, a sobering UN report found that some changes, such as rising sea levels and warming oceans, are already irreversible. And the report said it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. The UN Secretary General called the findings a code red for humanity. Joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Radley Horton. He's a climate scientist and Lamont Research Professor at Columbia University. Dr. Horton, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us, especially to discuss something so important today. So scientists have been sounding the alarm on climate change for years. Now, that UN report we just showed said it's basically affecting every region of the planet. What do you hope to see come out of this conference? What could actually happen here that might make a difference?
Yeah, well, we need to rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We need to get globally to a 50% reduction within the next decade and to what's called net zero, which means that we're not emitting any more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere than are being taken out. So that needs to happen by 2050. Very ambitious, but that's what it's going to take to not blow through that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target. It may, as you alluded to, just be too difficult to adapt to, especially for the world's most vulnerable.
And now, Dr. Horton, some climate scientists are saying that we're really running out of time to avert the most devastating impacts of global warming. Tell us, what exactly do those look like, and explain to us why the situation is so dire right now.
Yeah, so we can split this up into the extreme weather events that we're seeing with increasing frequency, and then also the societal impacts. So in terms of the extreme weather events, we're talking about far more fires than we saw in the past. We're talking about record-breaking heat waves, record-breaking combinations of heat and humidity that a person really can't survive or function outdoors in for long periods of time. We're also talking about more heavy rain events and more coastal flooding, as higher sea levels mean that whenever a storm comes along, it piles up water in our cities and our populous coastal areas. And when we start to talk about the impacts, one of the things we've really learned in recent years is that our systems are more vulnerable to a little bit of warming, and more extreme events than we thought. So crop yields really starting to drop during heat waves, more people migrating, just more vulnerability across the board, and the potential for real economic displacement, shifts in value fast, just with the amount of changes in climate extremes we've seen so far.
And Dr. Horton, I want to ask you a little bit about climate injustice. So richer countries generally contribute more to rising emissions, but developing nations are then disproportionately affected by flooding and these other extreme weather events that you've mentioned. Climate activist Greta Thunberg, who's also attending this summit, spoke about this in a recent interview. First, let's play some of what she said, and I'll ask a question on the other side.
It's not fair when, for example, one country sends lots and lots and lots of delegates, and then another country is very underrepresented. And as long as we continue to ignore this in the very negotiations, that of course will not have a successful outcome.
How do we begin to solve this massive issue of climate injustice? Where do we start? And what do people here in the U.S. who maybe aren't seeing an impact right in their front yard need to know about what's happening to others around the world?
Yeah, so as you said, it starts with the history, right? It's the countries that in the past, like the U.S., have emitted so many greenhouse gases that last in the atmosphere for 100 years or so. So they're still causing sea levels to rise, those emissions from the past. And per capita, developed countries that have become rich off of greenhouse gases continue to emit more gases per person than developing countries do. But as you also alluded to, it's not just the emissions side of the story. When we look at vulnerability to those types of storms that I talked about before, it's the vulnerable countries that tend to suffer the most, tend to be a lot of the hotter places that are experiencing those extreme heat waves with greater frequency, but also less prepared for any extreme weather that you get, less financing for seawalls, for example, and less institutional capacity. So whether you're talking about developing countries or within the U.S., those vulnerable communities that have experienced injustice in the past, it's a focusing effort that's critically important, as you noted.
All right, Dr. Horton, thank you so much for having this discussion with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now to the coronavirus pandemic and a somber reminder of the virus's impact worldwide. This morning, the global COVID death toll topped 5 million less than 2 years into the pandemic. The U.S. is reporting more deaths than any other nation, with more than 740,000 lives lost. This comes as the battle over vaccine mandates intensifies. New York City is bracing for the impact of the city's new vaccine mandate, which is now officially in effect. That means thousands of firefighters, police officers, and sanitation workers who refuse the vaccine are now suspended without pay. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park shows us the impact of this mandate as the nationwide vaccine rollout heads into a critical week.
Savannah, Joe, good morning to you both. Well, New York City is in the spotlight today with the vaccine mandate officially taking hold. Union leaders for several days have warned of a potential staffing crisis. However, the city says they're prepared for any challenges.
The nation's largest fire department under pressure. Just hours before New York City's vaccine mandate is enforced, thousands of firefighters and other unvaccinated municipal workers could be on unpaid leave starting Monday. But some members of the FDNY are protesting the mandate, calling in sick and disrupting essential services. One New York congresswoman tweeting, 26 FDNY companies are closed, including 5 in my district.
engine is open, but the ladder is closed. God forbid there is a major fire or a severe car accident, or if a crime takes place, or even worse.
FDNY's commissioner firing back. The department has not closed any firehouses, but he did confirm members were calling out sick, writing, "Irresponsible, bogus sick leave by some of our members is creating a danger for New Yorkers and their fellow firefighters. They need to return to work or risk the consequences of their actions." The mayor adding that there will be contingencies to address staffing issues if they arise, while noting a 91% vaccination rate among city workers Saturday. For days, firefighter unions have expressed outrage over the mandate, asking for additional time to get the shot.
My members have been given a proper opportunity to be informed by the department of the city what's going to happen to them.
The vaccine battle is brewing ahead of a critical week to clear COVID shots for more than 28 million 5 to 11-year-olds. Many of them out in full force this Halloween, with some families eager for an extra dose of protection.
I'm definitely relieved that they can. It's something that I hoped was going to happen sooner than later.
Hospitals, including Star Med Healthcare in Charlotte, are ready for the rollout days before the CDC's final endorsement.
We already have about 2,500 kids already signed up.
And the first week after the vaccine's approval, the Biden administration says that it's ready to distribute 15 million shots. Meanwhile, back here in New York City, we have learned that ever since that 5 p.m. deadline on Friday, more than 2,000 firefighters took medical leave. Guys, back to you.
All right, Kathy, thank you.
Let's stay on the vaccine rollout for kids and bring in Dr. James Wood. He's an assistant professor of pediatrics at the Indiana University School of Medicine. Dr. Wood, good morning. Thanks for being here. So tell us, what were the trial results for kids 5 to 11 years old who got the Pfizer vaccine? Will younger children be as protected as vaccinated adults?
Sure, yeah. So we were happy to see that the trial results were very promising. It did show that kids were protected 91% against getting coronavirus. And so really, I think this is what we were looking for. We were hoping to see in these trials, and they were protected similar to, the teenagers above them and the adults.
Dr. Wood, we know not all parents are on board. A recent Kaiser survey found only 27% of parents say they'll get their kids vaccinated right away. 33% plan to wait and see. 30% will if it's required. 5% of parents say they won't get their kids vaccinated at all. What do you think can be done to convince parents that it is worth getting the vaccine for their kids?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, vaccine hesitancy has been around for a long time. And as pediatricians, we're used to having these kinds of conversations with parents. So it really comes down to meeting them where they're at, understanding the reasons why they're hesitant or want to wait, or, what their position is, and talking to them, having a very, civil conversation and understanding. I mean, as a parent, I understand why there are concerns, but making sure that people are making informed decisions and not decisions based on things that are misleading. And that's really the key. And so I think it's really trying to get this info to folks, and having these conversations is the key, because as we all know, there's so much information coming in all the time.
All right, Dr. James Wood with some great info for parents. Thank you so much.
The Supreme Court is set to hear 2 cases today challenging the most restrictive abortion law in the country, Texas's Senate Bill 8. The Department of Justice and abortion providers in Texas are challenging the structure of the law, which allows any private individual to sue anyone who carries out an abortion or aids in an abortion. The law bans abortions from being performed after a heartbeat is detected. It's about 6 months into a pregnancy. We're joined now by NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley, along with NBC News legal analyst and former New York State and federal prosecutor Tali Farhadian-Weinstein. Julia and Tali, good morning to you. Julia, let's start with you. These 2 cases from Texas are not directly related to abortion rights. So tell us, what are the issues before the justices, and could they discuss Roe versus Wade here, or is that unlikely?
Well, actually, it's not as likely that they would discuss Roe versus Wade. Really, what they're being asked to weigh in on here is how unusual this law is. We do know that the Justice Department is making this case that it is unconstitutional, that they are not allowed to intervene. The way the law is set up, of course, is that it allows anyone who doesn't even have a connection to a woman getting an abortion to sue someone who may have even provided like an Uber ride to this woman to the clinic, just if she's only 6 weeks pregnant. That's usually the time where you can detect that heartbeat. And so they are going to be weighing in on how that law is supposed to be insulated from judicial review, and that the Justice Department's rights are being violated there. And then, of course, you have the abortion rights providers who are making the case that this also violates them and that they are now in the position where they have to sue the court. They've sued the clerks of court in the state of Texas because they're the only ones there who can enforce it. The law was written so that the state didn't have to enforce this law, which makes it very different from Roe versus Wade, which says that a state cannot intervene to keep a woman from getting an abortion at those earlier stages of pregnancy. And so we're really more likely to hear about this specific law today.
Tally, what makes this Senate Bill 8 so hard to challenge in court? What do both of the petitioners, the DOJ and the Texas abortion providers, have to do here to try and make their case before the justices?
Basically, they have to, in order to challenge this law, you have to play something like a game of whack-a-mole, because as Julia said, anybody in a country of 300 million people could presumably bring a lawsuit for any amount of money. $10,000 is the minimum amount that you can seek against just about anybody who has anything to do with helping someone get an abortion. And Texas has taken the position, well, you can express your views about the constitutionality of this law one by one every single time that happens. And what the United States and the abortion providers who have brought the second suit have said is that's an affront to the supremacy of our constitutional system, and that it's really about much more than abortion, because if this tactic succeeds here, then other states who disagree with other federal laws and would like to have their own regimes could set up similar systems to protect themselves from judicial review.
So, Julia, this is not the only case the Supreme Court is hearing this term on abortion. How does this case today, the two things they'll be hearing, set up a lawsuit from Mississippi, which is being heard next month?
That's right. That lawsuit from Mississippi, about a law that bans abortion at 15 weeks, that really gets to the heart of Roe versus Wade, because it is, in that case, a state making a law, and whether or not the justices agree that the state has the authority to make that law. This is where the test will be about whether or not President Trump was able to stack the court in such a way that, as he promised in the 2016 campaign, he would then be able to get the Supreme Court to overturn or at least extremely weaken the Roe versus Wade decision. That's the one we'll be watching for on that decision, on whether or not they will strike down Roe versus Wade. Today is really about this law, and it's actually today more than just about abortion. We'll hear from the Justice Department make the case that if they allow this law to pass, the same tactic can be used to implement any kind of policy, whether it be a right-wing policy or a left-wing policy around the country.
And finally, Tally, talking about today, what justices are you watching for or perhaps listening to today? And do you at this point have any idea how the court might rule, or is it just too hard to say right now?
Well, when justices come to oral argument, their questions are often not really just questions for the lawyers in front of them, but a way for them to talk to each other and to drop hints about what they are going to talk about when they go back to deliberate. So we're going to be listening for that, and I'm going to be listening for justices who might have might take, as Julia said in the next case, a view about abortion. They might say that Roe versus Wade needs to be reconsidered, restricted, overturned, but are also offended by the Texas law. I think it'll be interesting to find those.
All right, Julia Ainsley and Tally Farhadian-Weinstein, thank you both so much for helping us preview these big cases today.
A legal battle is looming this morning over the release of a wide range of former President Trump's documents related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The House committee looking into the insurrection subpoenaed the documents as part of its investigation. But over the weekend, the former president's legal team issued a court filing asserting executive privilege in an effort to keep the documents private. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now with the latest. Hey, Ali, good morning. So first, let's start with the documents. What do we know about them? What's in them? And then why does the former president want to keep them out of the public eye?
Hey, my friend, we're talking about hundreds of documents here that the January 6th committee requested from the National Archives. That's where you house all of these presidential and former White House documents. What we've learned now from the head of the National Archives in this filing is what exactly the former president and his legal team are trying to exert executive privilege over. There's a wide range here. It's things that belong to his former top aides, things like handwritten memos from the former chief of staff at that time, Mark Meadows, talking points from the then press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, but also things that belong to the former president himself, things like the White House Daily Diary, which detail conversations that the former president had over the phone, so his call logs, his schedule, meetings that he took. All of this would provide a really clear picture of what was going on in the upper echelons of the White House in the days, weeks, and months leading up to the January 6th insurrection, as well as specifically on the day of the insurrection and the immediate days after. It would be really illuminating for the January 6th committee if they can get them, and that's the big question.
So, Allie, now walk us through the former president's claim of executive privilege. Does he have a legitimate claim here to keep these from the House committee?
That is the big question looming over the January 6th committee right now. They're asking for a lot from the National Archives. They say they need all of this information to get the clearest picture that they can get. The former president, though, exerting executive privilege, and we're probably going to hear this question asked a bunch of times, and it's not exactly clear that we're going to get an answer, because here's what could happen. The Supreme Court could decline to take this up, and basically, the former president's legal team could just run out the clock here. If there's no decision on this and Republicans retake the House next November, they could disband the committee and get rid of these civil cases that the committee is trying to use to get these answers out of the former president. It's also important to know executive privilege is something that the current White House is not backing the former president up on. Yes, a former president can exert executive privilege, but it's not exactly clear where this is going to land right now.
And now, Allie, what does this court filing do to the timeline of the House committee's investigation? Also, we got some news just on Friday that committee member Adam Kinzinger will not be seeking re-election in the GOP. How does all of this impact this ongoing investigation?
Well, Kinzinger's retirement really has nothing to do with the work of the January 6th committee, but it does have a lot to do with January 6th, which for many Republicans was a formative day. 10 of them voted to impeach the former president for his role in inciting that January 6th insurrection. Kinzinger was one of them. He's now the second of those 10 Republicans who have decided to retire from Congress at the end of his term. The first of them was Congressman Anthony Gonzalez out in Ohio. Kinzinger will stay through the end of 2022, but his retirement says more about where the Republican Party is at in the aftermath of Trump leaving office. This is how he put it over on the Sunday shows.
This is not on, the 10 of us that voted to impeach. It's not on Liz Cheney and I to save the Republican Party. It's on the 190 Republicans who haven't said a dang word about it. If the Republicans take the majority, they will kill this committee. Look, they killed an independent commission. They've killed any attempt to get to the truth.
And that there, Savannah, is where the work of the January 6th committee and the 2022 midterms collide. You and I have talked about this a lot. They're on a timeline on the January 6th committee to do as much as they can as quickly as possible, because even though the midterms are next year, that's still a pretty short period of time to go through all of the legal cases that they're trying to go through, which can really muck up the process and slow things down. They're trying to do this as quickly as possible because they may not have the chance to get that information if Republicans retake the House.
All right, Allie Vitale, thank you so much.
Time for a check on your morning news now weather.
Which means Bill Cairns joins us. Hello, Bill. Good morning.
Hey, happy November. I hope everyone had a good Halloween. Yes?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You too.
That's very convincing. I did see Joe working. I saw Joe working Saturday morning in my PJ, so that was kind of fun for once. So that was good.
That was my outfit, my costume. Was news anchor person.
Exactly. So let's get into this November forecast. So we had an extraordinarily warm October. It's probably going to be, when we get the final numbers in, one of the warmest Octobers we've ever had in the lower 48. So any kind of dose of reality back to like cold is going to be a little shock to the system. But there's going to be a lot of people this week digging for their winter coats and gloves and hats for the kids, especially in the mornings. The afternoons won't be as bad, but highs today only in the 40s and even 30s in areas of Nebraska. There's even a little bit of snow this morning in Nebraska. And then that cold air spreads even down to the south. Oklahoma City only in the 40s. That'll be your chilliest of the season. And some of that cold air, I won't call it cold, I'll call it cool air, will be over in New York City, D.C., and Pittsburgh. You'll notice it especially in the mornings. There'll be a lot of mornings in the 30s for the first time, and the afternoons will be in the 50s. So definitely jacket weather for sure. Now, as far as any wet weather or snow goes, it's this time of year that we have to remind everyone, when you look at this weather map, the white is the clouds, the green is the rain, and the blue is where the snow is. So, yeah, there's a little bit of snow this morning in areas of Nebraska, a little bit maybe trying to come down in Iowa, and then on the West Coast, we're happy to say another day of rain for San Francisco northward. So here's the forecast for the week ahead. A beautiful afternoon in areas all of the east, everywhere east of the Mississippi for that matter. There's that little storm in the west. Tuesday's kind of quiet, a little bit of rainy in Dallas, Oklahoma City, and Little Rock on Wednesday. Still nice on the East Coast middle of the week. And then as we end the week, a little rain system in the mid-Atlantic, but and then maybe the Northwest, a little bit of rain. This is a very quiet weather week. Last week we had that huge nor'easter, we had the big California storm, plus we had that flooding event in the mid-Atlantic to end the week. So we'll take a nice quiet start to November.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and some nice sweater weather, too. So,
yes.
There you go.
Very fall. Thanks, Bill.
Yes.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.